myself.
Oh, right. So Shana, it's really, really good to be with you. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you and talking about your new book, which I have enjoyed and have been reading, Honest Sex. As I told you, my wife Carlin has also been reading it. I read a lot of books. She doesn't always, read the same books I am or interested in the same ones that I am at the same time. So she really enjoyed it as well. So we're going to talk about that shortly.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just introduce you to those that don't know who you are, to talk a little bit about your background, what you do in the field, and then we'll kind of lead into then where the book fits with your work and where it is now.
Perfect. So you want me to say a little bit about where I've come from?
Yeah, where are you coming from?
Here?
Great. What's your roots and how do you come to be doing what you're doing?
Yes. Okay, I'm just realizing my microphone isn't working. Hold on one second. Can we pause it for a second?
Sure.
Okay. Let me just plug it back in. Okay, so yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes I've still look at the book and I'm like, wow, did I really write a book called Honest Sex? Like I did that, and it feels very bold. And some moments I feel like, the work I do is not just about sex. It's about relationship and intimacy and love and connection and self-love and all of that. So I've been a relationship coach for 20 years. And in that time, have been going through my own relationships. And I was divorced 10 years ago, have been, dating in my 30s and 40s since. I'm now mid to late 40s. So it's been an interesting journey around what is it that keeps relationships alive? What is it that keeps relationships connected? What is it that allows people to have love and intimacy, whether it's a long-term relationship or whether it's starting to date or whether it's, how they say sometimes for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And so I think my interest has been in, all right, how do we create these deep, intimate, passionate connections in whatever time range we have, where we are honest with ourselves and honest with each other. And I think that can be the hardest part, is actually knowing what we want beyond expectations and conditioning, and then being able to actually say it to someone else, not without the fear that we're going to be rejected. I would say probably with the fear that we're going to be rejected, but that willingness to be honest, even if it seems like it could break something or end a relationship. So yeah, I've really, ever since I was young, been interested in how do people come together in a loving relationship and stay alive and not just, go to sleep or settle or feel like, I guess this is all I get, how do we actually be co-creative and keep things fresh and loving and passionate?
Well, yes to all of that. And I love the title of your book for a couple of reasons and what you describe about it, because I think everybody, when you hear the word sex, you get people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly guys. I mean, I'm a guy, so I mean, anytime sex is anywhere in the air, I pay attention. And as I've gotten to know women, I grew up with the idea that men are the ones that are interested in sex and women are the ones that are, no, not so much, but then you've got to somehow get them interested, and you didn't know how to do that, but you somehow stumbled your way. So I think for men and women, as I've learned over the years, having been married twice before,
Mm-hmm.
and as you know, now married for the third time to a woman I'm madly in love with and have been together with for 42 years. We're very interested in the whole notion of an expanded view of sex and sexuality
Yeah.
that includes all of the things that you're talking about that have to do with love and intimacy. And how do we do that in real life, given that we've all come from families where we didn't necessarily learn all the good things we needed to learn in families. So,
Or most of the good things we need to
yeah,
learn for relationships, right? We learn great things, but
exactly. So talk a bit about actually writing the book and what went into it. I just mentioned again the subtitle: A Passionate Path to Deepen Connection and Keep Relationships Alive. Talk about kind of, because I've written books, as you know, and
yeah.
taking ideas and actually putting them into a book is a journey. So talk a bit about what that was for you.
Yeah, I mean, at first it was going to be more of a memoir where I wanted to bring together my experience in my spiritual work and meditation, as well as the authentic relating and authentic, workshops that I've taught in communication and authenticity and authentic communication, as well as my experience with sex and tantra and orgasmic meditation and some of these practices that I think the norm or the common culture hasn't really experienced. And I just always got excited about the overlap between all three of those and thought it would be really interesting. And then as I started writing it, I realized that that memoir might happen someday, but I wanted a little more of a down to earth guide or manual to help people understand the foundations of, okay, we try to start these relationships, and many of us, like you said, didn't necessarily get what we needed growing up to learn how to be intimate and connected and to navigate the need for connection and for autonomy. And so, I wanted to really start exploring, even from, I don't necessarily talk about it as spiritual, because there's spiritual and psychological underpinnings of the fact that we are parts. We're not just one whole being, right? Especially, internal family systems talks about parts. And I have another teacher in the book who has a model called selfistry, and she talks about the different selves that we have. And so as I watched my parents growing up and starting to do my own work as an adult, what became clear to me is that we often give ourselves permission. I gave myself permission at one point to really act out from some of the less mature selves. And I created a lot of messes in my marriage that really undermined the trust and the respect, that we had for each other. And that in turn killed the connection and the passion. And so I really started seeing, okay, all of these are connected, and one of the little lines that came up along the way was, date nights and lingerie only do so much to bring passion back to a relationship, because underneath that are these foundations of how we're connecting and how we're treating each other and how we're seeing and understanding and hearing and listening. And, if those aren't in place, then we just keep stepping in these mine fields, or, we keep stepping in the shit, right? And then it's a downward spiral where we're no longer connected and we have to climb up out of that spiral. And so it's like this really challenging experience. So I started really looking at, my own life experiences and what's gone well and what's been challenging, and my clients' experiences as well, to bring it together in all right, how do we understand what honesty actually is, an effective kind of honesty that creates the foundation for connection and passion? How do we then understand what sex is? Because I think we've all been, I should never say we all, many of us, I think, have been given a very limited definition of sex, where we're trying to live up to someone else's rules and ideas about it, which makes it much less pleasurable and much more painful and much more difficult to navigate. And then I wanted to give in the third part some tools and perspectives for how do we talk about sex in a way that doesn't kill our sex lives? And what are those underlying foundations and perspectives that create more connection and intimacy?
All really important. And having read the book, you really deliver on what you offer. And
Thank you.
I want to ask you a little bit about males and females around sexuality and in the book, because my experience as a guy growing up, I was not very relationship oriented around sexuality. It was more like, you know, that old, can you get a girl to go from first base to second base and
Right.
then, you know,
Get a
score,
home run. Let's go.
get a home
Score.
run,
Yeah.
you know, and that's kind of what my buddies would talk about. How do you get there?
Yeah.
And then when I was in a real relationship, I found out I knew very little about the relationship and how to actually have a relationship with the real person.
Yeah.
And I know the book is obviously for men and women, and you also have a lot of experience talking to men and working with men. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that side of it first, about what you've learned about working with men and some of your own kind of unique experiences. Not a lot of women that I know who are really good in the relationship world, particularly in how to talk to men and how to relate to men, which you do quite well. So talk a bit about how you do that and how the book, you know, particularly speaks to some of the confusions maybe that men have.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I've found in working with men is, and in my experiences, so when I first started working with men, I had an opportunity to be a woman coach in a workshop for men where we gave honest and loving feedback about the impact that men were having on us. And it was a way, and then I've carried this forward into my coaching now. It was a way for men to practice or understand like the blind spots, like why is this happening? Why are women responding? You know, if they're in heterosexual relationships, why are women responding to me in this way? And what am I doing that's creating this? Not to say that, you know, we all have, it's a dance and we all can take responsibility. But if I want to empower myself, I want to know when I speak, you know, is someone feeling my presence? Is someone feeling my love and care? Are they feeling my defendedness? And so part of what I've learned over the years is that men have just as much going on under the surface as women. You know, sometimes when people say that raising boys is easier than raising girls, it raises my hackles a little bit, because I feel like, well, just because boys might be quieter about certain things doesn't mean that all of this isn't happening. And I think then boys grow up to be men and they're taught often to suck it up and man up and, you know, don't cry and don't be a pussy and all those things. And so there's a lot under the surface. And when I talk about sex with men, it's a very concrete way to understand some of the dynamics that are happening in the emotional communication intimacy realm, right? So it's been really powerful, you know, for men to get to practice or bring attention to, you know, well, what do I actually want and what feels good to me? And not just me trying to be a nice guy and please women and make sure that, you know, a happy wife is a happy life, but also not to go to the other end, like you said, of kind of being more of that without education. It's like, oh, well, let me just get in here and get what I can get and not really understand these relational dynamics. So I often work with men on finding that middle path, right? Where we're not defended or dissociated. We're not checking out or kind of, you know, just being postured. And then we're also not collapsing or trying to please or apologize and letting go of one's own sovereignty and self.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find that in working with men, it's really rich, and that I get to practice, I think men's work is really important, and men working with men is really important. And then it's often men who are heterosexual go back to their relationships with women, not having practiced or not having had some of those conversations. And so the stakes are really high when you're in a relationship with someone and you're worried that if you say, oh, I like this, or I want this, that could break the relationship.
Right.
And I often also work with a lot of men who've started over after divorce or long-term relationship breakups, and they don't want to have those painful dynamics where they become roommates, or where one person nags and the other person fights
Mm,
back. And, so getting to create the foundation where that doesn't have to happen
mm.
is important too.
And you bring up something that I think is really important, which is the vulnerability we all feel
Yeah.
in any relationship.
Yeah.
You can't be intimate without being vulnerable,
Yeah.
and you can't be vulnerable without risking getting hurt.
Yes.
And so when you talk about honest sex, um, part of me both longs for that,
Mm-hmm.
and also I realize has a resistance to that, because it feels like at times, if I'm honest
Mm-hmm.
about what's going on inside of me, I'm going to lose out.
Yeah.
Either I tell her the truth and she's going to say, okay, thank you, but I'm not interested in you.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to say something honest and truthful, but it's really foolish. And,
You'll feel
something,
ashamed or
I'm going to feel
embarrassed, or
ashamed, or
Mhm.
I'm going to do something to hurt her or say
Yeah.
something. So how do you navigate that edge in allowing honesty to be okay,
Mhm.
and to be able to enrich a relationship, rather
Mhm.
than, I think so many of us have, if not the experience, the fear that if I'm honest, I'm going to lose, or the other person is going to leave, or things are going to get worse, or we're going to end up, all the things that
Yeah.
we tell
All the
ourselves
things.
that we get afraid of. And so we're sort of honest, or we're honest sometimes, but not about the real stuff.
Yeah. Well, I feel really touched. First of all, I could feel tears coming into my eyes, just, understanding and knowing that you, as a therapist and as someone who's written 17 or 18 books at this point on human dynamics and men, that we all, I think, and again, I never like to say all, but I think all humans feel that vulnerability and the fear of, well, now I'm going to, now I'm unlovable, or now this makes me unwanted, and especially with the person closest to us, right? So it can seem like as we get closer to someone, or as we are in a relationship longer, we're safer, but at the same time, it hurts more when someone rejects us or doesn't agree with us when we are that close. So when I think about having these conversations, it takes backing up often to first agree, okay, how are we going to communicate with each other? How are we going to treat each other? Are we going to be on the same team, such that I want what's best for you? And which often for me looks like, oh, we're going to be friends first, right? I want the best for my friends. And when I'm in a romantic relationship, I can then be scared that if you want something and it doesn't work for me, then shit, I don't know what we're going to do. We might have to separate, right? But I think if we can come from that place of, let's look to create a win-win. Let's look at how we can create a win-win. And so in the book, I talk about a couple different perspectives around looking at the why, right? Why do we want what we want? What are those underlying motivations that if we can start to share those with our partner, sometimes our partner can feel less threatened, right? Or because if I say to you, and again, sex just ends up being a really concrete example, right? If I were to say, or someone were to say to their partner, I want you to wear lingerie, and the other partner says, I don't like that, or I don't feel good about that, or that's not who I am. right? Then we're at a stalemate. Whereas if we actually go deeper to the vulnerable layers of, I want to feel more, I don't know, I want to feel more eroticism, or I want to feel more like this is a special occasion, and it's markedly different than all the other things we do and taking care of the house and the kids and whatever, right? Then we can start to have a joint conversation around, okay, well, how could we do that in a way that feels good to you and a way that feels good to me? Or what ways would I be willing to stretch a little bit out of my comfort zone? In what ways would you be willing to stretch a little bit out of your comfort zone? And how do we have these conversations without blaming, shaming, or attacking? So I give an example in the book of, when one partner says, no, that's not me, that can be really painful for the other partner. And I think I even gave the example of going on a run. Like, I want to go running with you. And the one person says, I don't run. I don't do that. It makes me nauseous and I hate it. Right. That's very different than someone saying, okay, I hear that you have that desire. Running has always been really challenging for me and it doesn't necessarily feel good on my body, but can you help me understand why you want that and what you want out of this time that we would spend together? So then we can get into that deeper conversation. And then I could say, okay, well, I would be willing to try this, right? I'm willing to give a little or stretch a little. I'm willing to go on a fast walk with you, or I'm willing to see what it would be like to sprint down the street and then walk from there. And so then we can have these connected conversations where, I talk about looking for that, the win-win, the deeper why, and then also that context, right? So if I say to you, I want to have better sex, most often the receiver's mind goes to, oh shit, what's wrong with me? Maybe they're not attracted to me anymore. Maybe something's wrong with me. Maybe they want to leave. Maybe they're on the verge of getting a divorce. Whereas if I state a context of, hey, sweetheart, like, I love you. And, I feel really good about our relationship. And I'm wondering how we could explore even more pleasure and more passion together. We can frame these conversations in ways that work for our internal self-doubt committee that help each other, right? Help each other feel heard and understood, and help it be collaborative instead of tit for tat, or either or you win, I lose, I win, you lose.
Yeah, it's so good. And when you're talking about that, what it brings up for me is that when we talk about sex in a sense, in the old way, maybe the way I grew up, that it was so both important, from the time I was a little kid. God, that was like the rainbow, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, that it just, if only I had that, everything would be wonderful.
Right.
And the way you describe this, it's like we're really going on a journey to get to know ourselves more deeply, and to get to know our partner more deeply, and to join together in a mutually, juicy and enjoyable, exploration of being. And you wrote something in your book that kind of remind me of this. You said, it says, we are not who we think we are, and neither are our partners. And I wanted to get a sense of what I think I know what you meant by that, but talk a little bit about that, because I think part of this journey is really letting down the masks to get to know who we are, and finding out that we can still be together, that if you really knew me, you would still want to be with me.
Yeah. There's so many pieces to that. And I think just before going there, speaking to what you said about sex and sex being the pinnacle, and in most of what I learned when I was young, sex was intercourse, and sex was genital intercourse. And like, that was the pinnacle, and that was the goal, and that's where we're trying to get to. And climax is, orgasm is the pinnacle of that experience. And so we're trying to get there. And when we really, so the second section of the book is expanding, well, what is sex actually? What if my, idea is that sex is an exploration of our senses, of our emotional, physical, energetic, soulful, right? All of these aspects of ourselves. And it's kind of like going to a playground where we get to explore and see what feels good. Not now we need to get to this, one specific way that someone has described as the pinnacle of heightened pleasurable experience. So in that way, right, I think we are these beings who are supposed to, well, I don't even know if we think this or if this is more of a subconscious, but it's like, in order to be right or to be good or to be attractive or wanted, we need to follow this script. And what I've found is that when we go back to, well, what do I actually enjoy? What feels good to me? What feels good to us? There's an us here, and something new is going to be created here that hasn't been created anywhere else. That's going to be very different. And so that's one aspect of we're not who we think we are. The other aspect that I wrote about in the first section of the book is it goes back to those, we have these different parts. And I have a very strong part that I found in my marriage that was critical and judgmental and very particular about the way I want things and very irritable. And I also have parts that are incredibly optimistic, incredibly collaborative, incredibly soulful, spiritual, deep, like not knowing, right? Even, I have no idea who I am as a human being, and I'm willing to question that. So not knowing, or, that I'm not who I think I am, my partner is not who I think I am. I've had really beautiful experiences in relationship dynamics where, oh, I see that how you're speaking right now is coming from maybe a more younger, a more immature part. That doesn't mean that I have to respond with my younger, immature parts. I actually get to choose which parts I say in the book are driving the bus. One of my teachers talked about, okay, we've got a whole bus of parts, and which one are you going to give the keys to? So I think a lot of us give permission to the parts that are like, well, I want it this way, or I'm going to stand up for my right to have it this way, and that way is wrong and this way is right. But when we can look at, oh, is that effective in creating intimacy and connection? Not usually. Okay, so how do I then start to gain access to these other parts? And I found, meditation and mindfulness and some of the other practices that I've done, yoga and some of my spiritual practices, have really helped me take a step back and be able to respond instead of react, as one of my favorite Viktor Frankl quotes, right? That in between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, right, it makes all the difference. Like, he didn't say this part, but right, it makes all the difference if we can actually pause and recognize, wow, I am really heated about this and something is triggering me. And instead of yelling at you, or instead of collapsing and shutting down and running away, I'm going to consciously say, let's take a pause here. And I'm going to go do some exploration. I'm going to go exercise or talk to a friend or go to my therapist or my coach or whatever. And then let's come back together so that we can bring our best selves, or I don't know, that might sound too hierarchical, right? But the ones who actually have our best interests in mind. And then we can collaborate about this instead of both of us getting stuck in our triggers.
True, very, and not so easy to do, and lots to learn that we
Not
all.
easy.
I think that's part of what I've learned over these many years, is that we're all learning how to live our lives, and we're all learning how to do relationships, and we're all learning how to be joyful and what sex is, and how do we do it as part of a full life. And what occurs to me is that most of us, by the time you get to be a certain age, certainly in our 40s, I'm older than that, obviously, and we've had relationships that have ended. Many of us, I mentioned I'm on my third marriage. I think this is third time's the charm. My wife and I think we finally gotten over the, well, is this going to work out? Well, after 43
42
years,
years.
we're
Yeah.
think it's going to work out, and we still got a lot to learn. But
Mm.
I'm wondering, in both in your book and in your life experience,
Yeah.
what you could say to people who've been in a relationship and the relationship has ended,
Mm-hmm.
and you've come out of that, and now you're either in between relationships, or you're dating, or you may even be in a new relationship, but you
Yeah.
still have some old
Questions.
baggage, some old ideas, some, I call them shadows of the past.
Yep.
How do you understand those things? How do you deal with them? How do you understand ways in which we can heal them
Yeah.
or bring them to the surface so that they don't either prevent us from getting in another relationship because we're so
Mm-hmm.
afraid we're going to screw it up or make a mistake again,
Yeah.
or we're in a relationship but we find we're being contaminated or brought back into our old way of being from the past. That's a lot of words for
Yeah.
a simple question.
Well, I mean, part of what I've discovered in the decade of not being married anymore and dating again is that, I made a couple strong commitments to myself after my divorce. One of them was that I wasn't going to open my mouth until I could speak from a place that was going to create more connection or more possibility for intimacy rather than less. And I will say I'm not perfect, but for the most part, I've lived up to that commitment. The other one was I'm not going to get into a long-term relationship until I've managed to overcome my people-pleasing tendencies and the part of me that loses myself. And to that one, I've said to myself, good luck, because the only way to practice that is to engage in relationships, And so I've had to kind of dive back into the deep end, not fully knowing for sure whether I am capable of a 40-year marriage, right? Like, I don't know at what point I would lose myself such that the relationship starts to crumble. But what I do know is that in my relationships now, I've practiced with my partners being more honest and saying, so now I basically request when I'm in a relationship that we have at least once a month, maybe sometimes a couple times a month, check-in where we get to be honest and we get to say in a productive way, like, here's what I love, here's what's going well, and here's what I've struggled with, or here's where maybe I didn't even know it until this moment because now I'm given permission to see, but where my energy feels a little bit drained, or where I'm kind of twisting in a way to please you to try to make things go well, and it feels really scary to say this. However, if I don't, I'm probably just going to start to, turn away more and more. So in my current relationships, that I've had in the past couple of years, it's been really beautiful and less the outward appearance of stability. Like, I haven't committed to marriage. I haven't, and so in a way, a relationship could end at any point if we say, wow, this isn't working. But what we've committed to is working it through and being conscious of these dynamics and being in support of each other's growth and well-being. So I don't think it's easy. And I imagine, you could talk to this as well, right? I don't think it's easy to have a conscious relationship. I think it can feel risky, and like we have less of a, it's written in stone that we're going to stay together. And so it can feel a little more edgy for people if that's what you choose. But I think the depth of connection and intimacy can be really fostered by the growth that happens when we're willing to be honest with each other, and when we're willing to say, this is what scares me, or this is what excites me, or this is what I didn't feel seen in that moment or understood in that moment.
I think what that brings up for me, from my experience, is that one of the things that has gotten in the way for me personally and a lot of people I work with is that many of us have had a early experience and upbringing that told us that there was one special person that was ours, our dream lover, our soul partner, and that once we found them, the music would be playing, and across the
La,
crowded room, you'd fall in
happily ever
love,
after.
and yeah, I'd live happily ever after. And then it doesn't work for so many of us, that whatever happened, we're not with that person.
Yeah.
And so, but we hold on to this view that there's this one special person, this needle in the haystack. And now that we have the internet and we've got huge numbers of ways we can meet an infinite number of people,
Yeah.
in some way, you'd think it would be easier. Well, I've got more opportunities,
Options.
but
Yeah.
on the other side, it's like with an infinite number of potential people, and there's only one that's mine. It's like, and maybe I blew it the last time when whatever, and so maybe I don't even have anybody out there. I'll spend the rest of my life looking.
Yeah.
So what I've told myself first, and then my clients that I've worked with, I've said, my experience has been that there are 5,283 perfect partners for you. And the
Perfect
idea that
meaning, not that it's going to be a fairy tale,
5,283,
but
just exactly. And so when you're out there, you don't have to be so terrified
yeah.
that, is this the one?
Mm-hmm.
They may be. There's probably a lot of people that you
The
could be
ones.
perfectly happy for the rest of your life with.
Yeah.
And when I've said that, people laugh, and are you that number? And it's obviously a made up number, but it's allowed me to be able to be less pressured and to explore, to be able to meet people. And when Carlin and I met, and we decided over time, see how it goes.
You're my one.
Learn that now we've decided, yes, this is the one. And sure, there probably could have been some others, and maybe there will be if one of us dies, who knows? But for now, we can just be. And I wonder what your experience is of that, both fear of limitation and the fear that maybe you've either blown it, or there's so many choices you'll never be able to decide who the right one is.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways that I often talk about with my clients that I try to live as well is, instead of "are you the one" when meeting someone, it's like, what is the highest good for each of us in this connection? Are we partners? Are we lovers? I had a friend who designated someone as like a significant friend and lover, right? Instead of a significant partner or significant other. It's like so many different things. We might be creative muses to each other. We might be spiritual practice partners. We might be art, I don't know, whatever it may be.
Right.
And so I like having that lens of it. To me, it feels much more abundant.
Right.
Okay, who can we be for each other? How can I leave you better than I found you? And how can you leave me better than I found you? Whether we're going to spend time together once, or whether we're going to spend, decades together. And a lot of my friends often marvel. They're like, "You said that? Like you were that honest on the first date? Aren't you supposed to wait?" And I'm like, I don't, I have a kid. I'm a single parent. I don't have a lot of time to waste. So I'm not rushing into things, but I'm honestly trying to discover, like, okay, who are you really, and what are you looking for? And are we a match? And if not, you're not wrong and I'm not wrong, right? We don't have to do the right wrong thing. We get to do oh, all right, well, maybe I know someone who's looking for what you're looking for, because it's not what I'm looking for. Or, so yeah. And every time a relationship has ended for me, and every time I talk to my girlfriends whose relationships ends, we all have the fear there's never going to be anyone else, and nobody's going to have what this person had. And I haven't met anyone who's ended up not having any other relationship ever again, unless someone really hunkers down and just has that belief, this is how it's going to be. Nobody else could, that it's a very limited, rigid mindset. So it feels to me like if we keep ourselves open to possibility, and we keep ourselves open to, I may not have everything with one person, and that doesn't necessarily mean we have to be polyamorous or open, but maybe in this phase of my life, I'd really love to have a relationship where someone would be a supportive partner, and take on some of the load of responsibilities. Mm-hmm. Whereas maybe in my past, I would have prioritized super hot sex, or maybe in my past, I would have prioritized, that we both want to travel and be out in the world together. So that we can have different things at different phases, and really navigate together. Okay, who do we want to be to each other? Who do we want to be with each other?
I want to bring it back around as we're kind of reaching the end of our time together, of something you said towards the beginning of our conversation, which was, in your personal life, it's been 10 years since you were married. Mm-hmm. And what I found for many, many people, they end a relationship, they go through the pain of an ending, and, mm-hmm. And then they get lonely, and mm-hmm. they get hungry for connection, and they often get back in a relationship quickly
because of that. Yeah.
And they don't do the work that you talked about doing. And I know I did this work, Carlin did this work before mm-hmm. she and I met, which is to really get our own life together, to have our own personal life grounded, and not consciously or subconsciously look for that other person in order to fill the hole or the what's missing in us. Yep. Because if you don't do that, then it's almost inevitable that you're going to be hungry for a relationship and then push it away,
or you're going to jump in. Yeah, the same unsatisfying, painful dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to, put in a pitch again for your book at another level beyond kind of the title and what you offer. But it, for me, is a guidebook for getting a really solid foundation to your life. Yeah. So that you don't need to either rush into a relationship because if I don't have somebody, I'm going to be so lonely, I'm going to die. Yeah. Or I've got to have somebody in order to, fix my life. But to really take this as a journey and a healing journey. And it's great to have, in a sense, a guidebook, not just for honest sex in whatever way you take that, but for an honest life that has meaning and grounding and can, serve us through time. So maybe you could say something about how you'd sum up your, not just the book, but the book and what you offer people, or what mm-hmm. you, from your experience, what you guide people in their journey at whatever stage of relationship they're in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could have called the book Honest Relationships or Honest Intimacy or Honest, right? It would have encompassed all of that as well. And there are in each chapter different, at the end, different exercises for self-inquiry and understanding mm-hmm. ourselves. And so, yeah, I agree. I think if we don't explore and get to know ourselves and get to know what are those holes that we're trying to fill, right? Where do we feel empty or lonely? Where do we feel less than or too much? Like, where are all those places that if we're looking for that affirmation outside of ourselves, it makes relationships harder because, and we're all going to do it. It's not like we can get to be perfect at this, but the more we're doing that, the more someone else is going to disappoint us, because they're going to be inevitably human and not meet us in the, that specific particular way that we want to be met. So like you, I really do suggest, right, that we get to know ourselves, and we go into those shadow places and the places that feel like, ooh, I don't want to look at that, or I don't want to feel that, or that's too shameful or embarrassing. And, fortunately, I feel like somehow when most, my clients who are men come to me, I think they've already heard my podcast and they've already heard my talk about men's vulnerability, the TEDx talk. And so they often feel really safe. And through that safety of sharing the places that we feel ashamed of, the shame loses its grip.
Yeah.
And so what I love is that I get to have some of those conversations with men and sometimes women too. I work with a lot of men these days, and just go deep into, what we don't start with necessarily, like, what do you feel like you can't say to someone, or what are you hiding?
Mhm.
But even just in going into, what do you want and what's important to you?
Mm.
There can even be shame there around, well,
Yeah.
my parents told me I was supposed to live this life and now I'm living this life. And,
Mm.
or my peer group wanted this and valued this growing up.
Yeah.
And so I took on this identity and now it's not really who I am. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, to me, it feels like a beautiful journey and, sometimes painful
Yeah.
to get to know these parts of
Yeah.
ourselves. But on the flip side, the relationships that I'm creating now have a depth of passion and intimacy, and less wondering, like, will you still love me if, there's a lot
Mm.
more of, well, actually, I love myself more and more.
Mm.
And so I'm less afraid to bring these vulnerable parts to you. And also, if you need to leave because of something, some way that I am, I'm still okay. I'm still good
Yeah.
enough. I don't need you to validate my
Yeah.
existence. I don't need you to feel good about myself.
Mm.
So,
Absolutely. You mentioned two things that I'd like to have you say before we wrap up. You
yeah.
mentioned your TED Talk, which
Mhm.
I found very moving and
Mm.
touching. You could just say the title of that, and also your podcasts, which are very powerful, and you've done a whole lot of interviewing some really interesting people,
Yeah.
including me. I've been on one of your
Yes,
podcasts,
those
but
have been
talk a little bit
fantastic.
about your TED Talk and what that was.
Yeah, so that's called What a Thousand Men's Tears Reveal About the Crisis Between Men and Women, and really comes from, I think the first line, or one of the first lines, is that I've had more than 1,000 men cry with me, and that I feel honored to get to hold that space and that love and compassion for the vulnerability that many men have been told makes them weak or unmanly or any of the other bullshit that, that they've learned. And to get to really, as a culture, right, my desire is that men get to be held in these vulnerable places, and that we recognize it as a strength and a depth of humanity that we all have.
Mm.
And then the Man Alive podcast, I interview people like yourself, which I've loved our episodes together. We did one on the father wound, and we've done beautiful conversations. And so they really support men in the realms of sex and relationship and intimacy and health and money and legacy and
Mm.
all of that. So it's a
Yeah.
good resource.
Well, one of the final things I would say to those that are watching and those that are reading about what what we're doing in the world is that there's something I think absolutely necessary to being a man and
Mm-hmm.
having a woman validate you by holding our feelings, the tears that are shed.
Yeah.
That I know it's been one of the most important things in my life to have somebody, not just my wife, because I think we have a tendency, I do speak for myself, to put all my vulnerability into one person who can, but to have, another woman, a friend, a guide, a therapist, a writer, who can also validate us who were not as worried about, oh my God, if my wife should not. But
Right.
I think you offer something really unique to men and women that I want to just acknowledge and recognize.
Mm.
And so how can people get your book? How can people find you to connect more fully with your work? Let people know.
Yeah, thank you. So you can go to my website, which is shanajamescoaching.com. Shana is Shana. And if you go to shanajames.com/honest-sex, you'll be able to find everywhere that Honest Sex is now being sold. And you can learn, the podcast is there. You can fill out, a form if you want to talk to me, if you have any questions, if you want to have more honest sex, or if you're struggling in a relationship, or if you're single and want to be in a relationship, all of those struggles that we have in love and relationships, feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to talk.
Well, super. Well, thank you. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you, and we'll say goodbye for today.
Thank you so much.